favorite TV show in the world is something called The Good Place, and on NBC, and one of my top favorite shows ever. And before I continue, I want to say this is your spoiler warning, okay? So if you're planning on watching The Good Place, or you're a few seasons behind, this is your spoiler warning, and I'm going to tell you, if you want to leave, I'll give you permission. So just think carefully whether or not you're a fan of The Good Place or not. I will never give this, probably ever again, permission for you to walk out. Okay? This is your warning. This is your opportunity. So, if you leave, I'm not going to be offended. Rick, okay, just know I'm never going to give you this chance again. So, for those unfamiliar with the show, the series focuses on a character named Eleanor Shellstrop, who is played by Kristen Bell, and she wakes up in the afterlife and is introduced by Michael, who's played by Ted Danson, and she's in what's called the Good Place. And it's a selective heaven-like utopia reserved for only the best of the best on earth as a reward for her righteous life. But quickly you realize that she actually wasn't that good of a person on earth and is actually there by mistake. So she's got to figure out a way to hide the fact that she isn't really who they think she is, and she's got to also become a better person thanks to the help of her soulmate, she's told, Chidi Anagonye, I think I'm something like that, Chidi Anagonye, who is played by William Harper Jackson. And she also has a couple other friends who are there named Jason and Tahani. So at the end of the first season of The Good Place, Eleanor actually realizes that she actually, again, this is spoiler warning, she actually isn't in the good place, but it's actually the bad place. So the bad place, again, is like we can imagine this hell-like netherworld where people are tortured. Only in this instance, the bad place isn't so much, the weeping and gnashing of teeth and burning skin. It's instead this place that's been created to torture these humans by torturing them emotionally, having these four humans, Eleanor, Chidi, Jason, Tahani, emotionally torture each other for eternity. So, being that Michael is an all-powerful, eternal being, at the start of season 2, Michael just simply reboots the whole thing and wipes everybody's memory and starts over from the previous attempt. Yet, despite the restart, again and again, whether it's Eleanor or someone else, they figure out the ruse. They figure out this is not the good place. This is actually the bad place. So I don't remember how many restarts. There's something like 800. It's just kind of crazy how many restarts there are. And eventually, Michael's coworkers. So there's this. If you can imagine this little neighborhood with all these different people, and all the different people are actually demons. So eventually, Michael's coworkers, we might say, he was the head demon. They grow weary of these constant reboots and constant refigurations, and they decide, they come to him and say, we're going to blow the whistle on this whole thing, on these constant failures. So Michael, realizing, the jig is up, he decides to actually befriend the humans, realizing it's in his best interest to get on the sides of the humans and let them in on the little secret. Now, what's interesting, in time he begins to see their point of view and goes from, wanting to torture humans to actually wanting to protect humans. So season 3 of The Good Place, again, we're now in season 4 if you're a fan. So season 3 of The Good Place centers on the fact that for the last 500 years or so, again, thinking in Earth time, no humans have actually made it into the good place and are actually all in the bad place. So after learning about this, Michael and the humans make an appeal to the judge, who's like this, imagine all-wise universal judge, in an effort to change the accounting metrics by which good and bad place points are given. So in chapter 38, the title of the episode is called Cheating the Time Knife, a fun little title. Michael and the humans travel to what's called the IHOP, or the interdimensional hole of pancakes. You have to watch so it's fun. So this IHOP is actually the universal intersection where all time and space dimensions intersect. So Michael chooses to go there because the judge, who he asks to meet him there, and the four humans, her powers are limited, and she can't just immediately, wipe him out on the spot. So there in the IHOP, Michael and the four humans, they plead their case to the judge. Basically, the point being something is wrong with the accounting system, the method by which people are judged to be good enough to go into the good place or not. So he begins his appeal by saying, hey, life is complicated. It's impossible for anyone to get enough points to get into the good place. So to illustrate his point, he kind of pulls up on a screen like this. He shows how an action that conceivably should earn one good points actually does the opposite and earn one's bad points. I can't say that. So buying a tomato from the grocery store, for instance, one would think would be a good action that would gain you points for the good place, but actually, the way things are going, it actually loses someone points. So he talks about the reasons they are, because in buying a tomato, a human is unwittingly supporting toxic pesticides, exploiting labor, and contributing to global warming. So heavy things. So Michael says, hey, humans think they're making one choice, he says, but they're actually making dozens of choices they don't even know they're making. Unfortunately, the judge is not impressed. She says, your big revelation is life is complicated? She says, that's a divorced woman's throw pillow. Not impressed. She counters, if humans want to avoid the negative consequences, they should just do the research, make better decisions. So at this point, Chidi, and if you know Chidi, he's always willing to jump in and give some quote, some philosopher to add to the conversation. He tries to step in and give a point from Jean-Paul Sartre, I think is what he says. And our friend Jason, if you know Jason, you gotta love Jason. Jason actually interjects and said, hey, you know what, I think I can add some, a good story here. And the three other humans are like, oh, we're lost, because Jason he's special. He's a good guy, but he's not always the brightest. But instead, Jason, he comes in, he tells a story about his friend Big Noodle from Jacksonville. And I guess Big Noodle was a part of his dance crew in Jacksonville. And Jason tells how Big Noodle was always late to dance practice because Big Noodle worked 3 jobs to take care of his 4 grandparents who all slept in a bed like Willy Wonka, if we remember Willy Wonka. And therefore, Jason was always forgiving of Big Noodle because he understood all the complicated factors in Big Noodle's life. So, Michael and the 3 other humans pick up and are like, exactly. You can't judge us because you don't know what we're going through, they tell the judge. So the judge says, okay, fine. So the judge goes to Earth to see for herself. And if you can imagine, she kind of disappears for a moment. And then she jumps back on to the scene and she says, oh, brother, that was rough. Earth is a mess, she says. And she says, and guess what? I guess I'm black, and they do not like black ladies down there. It's terrible everywhere and always in different ways. So relieved that the judge is starting to see their opinion, Michael says, see, that's the problem. Number 1, life is chaotic and messy and unpredictable. And number 2, even if you do manage to make good decisions, you still lose points because of the unintended consequences. So Eleanor at this point jumps in and says, yeah, there are booby traps everywhere, she says. If there's this chicken sandwich, and if you eat it, it means you hate gay people. And it's delicious. So the judge jumps in, and the judge says, it is so good. So what they come to terms with is they decide to create another experiment where they bring in 4 new humans to see if they can replicate the successes of these 4 other humans. But that is my favorite episode because it just talks about how life is complicated. And whether we mean to or not, our actions and choices have all kinds of unintended consequences. So I will throw myself under the bus here as an example. So I would consider myself someone who supports fair labor practices, LGBT equality, and protecting the environment, right? But I'm also someone, if I can confess, who buys things regularly from Amazon, eats Chick-fil-A, and drives across town regularly. So before you label me as a hypocritical, people-hating, toxic polluter, please give me a moment. I don't do these things because, I'm against living wages or LGBT equality or protecting the environment. I do so because, childcare is ungodly expensive. I feel like, can I get an amen on that? Like, childcare is ungodly expensive. I eat at Chick-fil-A because, let's be real, there's not that many places that have play places. And on days like today, it's like when you're home alone with the kids and they're screaming and bouncing off the walls, and you've already been to McDonald's play place 3 times that week, what's left to do? Guess it's Chick-fil-A today. And then, Amazon, sometimes taking kids to the store is just that's like a special bad place to experience all in itself. Because sometimes you take the kids to the store and you put your son in the grocery cart. I haven't told Karina this story. Put your son in the grocery cart. He decides to stand up right at the moment you tell him to sit down. And at the same moment, your daughter decides to shove the cart, and he flips out of the cart, lands on the floor, in the middle of King Soopers, starts screaming. And then in the middle of King Soopers, while you're trying to calm your son, while everybody else is staring at you, and sometimes you just decide, let's just buy something on Amazon today because I don't want to deal with that. So life is complicated, as I said. And it's not that, again, I mean to be against any of these things, and I do understand that life and our actions have consequences, but, life is complicated. And I imagine most of us have been here at some point, recognizing that our actions don't always line up with our values, but, unsure how to do things differently. So what can we do? Well, there's this ancient story that Jesus told that I think might have some relevance for us today. So Jesus often told these stories that they're called parables, and a parable was like a simple story with a deeper meaning that was used to illustrate a moral or spiritual lesson. So some examples of I would think modern day parables today would be like the ant and the grasshopper. If you watch the YouTube videos for your kids, they have a little silly song about the ant and the grasshopper. The grasshopper has fun all summer and doesn't pack away food for the winter, and the winter comes and he's cold and hungry. The ant and the grasshopper. It's a modern day parable. We probably all know the boy who cried wolf, right? You don't cry wolf because people might not believe you. Modern day parable. So just like these stories, so too in the parables of Jesus, there's often something else going into the story beneath the surface than what initially we expect. So in Luke chapter 18, Luke is one of the Gospels tells the story of Jesus. Jesus tells a couple of parables in chapter 18, and we're going to look at one today, being about a Pharisee and a tax collector. So I think we have it here on the screen for you to follow along with. I'm going to read it here because I like reading from the text. But in Luke chapter 18, we'll start in verse 10. See if I can find it. It says, 2 men went up to the temple to pray. One a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee, who was standing by himself, was praying thus, God, I thank you that I am not like other people, thieves, rogues, adulterers, or even like this tax collector over here. I fast twice a week. I give 1/10 of all my income. But the person he was referencing, there was another man in the temple that day, a tax collector. And the tax collector, staying far off, would not even look up to heaven, but was beating his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. Jesus says, I tell you, this man, the tax collector, went down to his home justified rather than the other, a Pharisee. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, but all who humble themselves will be exalted. So again, the gist of the story, 2 men went to the temple to pray. They're both Jewish people. They're obviously both religious, right? But the Pharisee, in this case, would be a person who was publicly recognized for his faith. The Pharisee would, I don't know, be like a pastor or some kind of religious leader back in the day, right? So it's a person publicly recognized for being a person of faith. Now, the tax collector, on the other hand, was as bad as the opposite of a Pharisee as you can imagine. They were generally scorned by their neighbors because they worked for the Roman government. And again, Rome was the occupying empire, the colonizer in that day. So the Pharisee says, God, I thank you that I'm not like these other people, thieves, rogues, adulterers, and especially this tax collector over here. I fast twice a week. I give 1/10 of all my income. Remember, in the Bible, In the Jewish faith, giving a tenth of one's income was a big deal. So the Pharisee is he's a model citizen. He's the complete opposite of the tax collector. And maybe you're here today and you're like, I don't like tax guys either. Whether you think about the modern day IRS or IRS agents, I think I would dare to say even the most corrupt IRS agent doesn't compare to these ancient tax collectors in Jesus' day. So back in that day, the Romans hired Jewish citizens to collect taxes for the empire from their fellow citizens. So here's the thing: tax collectors were given like a standard amount they're supposed to charge. So like I was supposed to charge Bill, $10, and Andy $12, and Suzanne $20. But whatever amount I was supposed to give for you to the empire, I could really just come to Suzanne and say, "Hey, Suzanne, you actually owe me $30. And then Andy, you really owe me $20. Bill, you owe me $15, and I could keep the difference." So obviously, fellow Jews did not like tax collectors because they're rich and they made their money based off exploiting and cheating other people. So they were obviously universally despised. But here, in what we just read, the tax collector seems to recognize his problem, and he begs for mercy. His prayer, rather than one of pride, is one of humility and remorse. He says, have mercy on me, O God. And through the years, if you've been in church for any amount of time, or you've grown up in church, or have some experience in church, you probably heard this text. This is a story of humility, right? To be humble, to be repentant for God, to acknowledge, and this tax collector is highlighted as a humble person, willing to acknowledge and confess his faults and beg for forgiveness. Whereas obviously the Pharisee is someone haughty and prideful, and we shouldn't be like that at all. So at its most basic point, we're taught this is a lesson in humility. We should be humble, acknowledge our mistakes, and seek to do better. Yes, we should all be humble. But I wonder, is that it? Is that all this parable is trying to tell us? I think there's more here. See, here's the thing. In that tax collector's plea for mercy, it's like there's got to be something more. Like he can't just plead for mercy, ask for forgiveness, then go about continuing to cheat people out of their money. Like something's got to change, right? And if you know the book of Luke, in the book of Luke, there's actually two other tax collectors highlighted. A Levi, who actually became a disciple of Jesus, and Zacchaeus. If you remember from Sunday school, Zacchaeus was a wee little man who climbed up in a sycamore tree. So Levi was a tax collector, and he decided to follow Jesus, and he threw a big party celebrating his new life. And Zacchaeus, if you remember, Jesus went home with him, and Zacchaeus pledged, "I'm going to give back everything I've cheated to people." And I think he, if I remember right, he pledged to give back even more, right? To repay the people he had cheated. So if we look deeper below the surface of the story, it seems pretty clear to me at least that Jesus isn't telling a nice story just about being humble. I mean, I don't think this guy can just go home and continue to be, as a tax collector, cheating people out of money. I mean, to me, he needed to make some hard decisions about whether he could continue to participate in a system that cheated other people regularly. And again, it's unsaid here in the story, and I kind of think that's the point of the parable, that it's the reader ultimately has to make that decision. The hearer, the reader, the listener has to say, what is the right conclusion? And to me, it's like that this guy can't, in good faith, just do nothing. Like something had to change. Maybe it meant quitting his job. Maybe it meant, challenging his fellow tax collectors to do right and collect what was the right amount. Maybe it meant for him only collecting what was fair. I don't know, but I feel like he had to ask himself some hard questions. And I think, if I can say this, I think we too this morning as human beings have to ask ourselves some hard questions sometimes. I think we too can need to confess and ask for mercy from God. Maybe say, God, I've only been a follower of you in name only. I've been unconcerned with the consequences of my acts. Say, God, I've only been concerned about being a Sunday morning Christian. And I think like the tax collector, the unspoken question, the unwritten question is that enough? And I think we all know that's a hard thing to do. It's a hard question to ask ourselves. It's humbling. Because it might require asking of ourselves some hard questions. It may require us asking forgiveness from God, from our neighbor. And, taking an honest look at the systems, the way we participate in systems, structures, practices that hurt other people, it's hard. And I think one of the reasons it's hard because these systems, these structures, these practices, they're constructed in a way to lure us in, to make us dependent on the system, and then basically make it impossible for us to get out of the system. And, maybe you're like, Lauren, calm down here. You're sounding a little conspiracy theorist, but let's be real, this is basically like consumer marketing practices, right? Again, Rome doesn't care. Rome doesn't care what the tax collector does as long as Rome gets its money. And again, maybe you're thinking, Lauren, that's far easier said than done. You're like, man, Lauren, I'm barely scraping by. I'm working 2 jobs just to pay the bills. I would love to buy, locally sourced, fair trade, organic food to feed my family. But finding the time to cook is impossible. And trust me, I get it. I bought this 5-ingredient recipe book because I want to cook more at home, and I'm flipping through this book. I'm like, nope, impossible, nope, not going to happen. So I get it. We've got to still try to exist in the real world, trying to pay our bills, feed our children, just plain afford life. And I think sometimes the only thing we can do, perhaps, is just to question the system, to ask questions. Why can't there be enough jobs that pay a living wage? Why can't we figure out affordable health care? Or, yeah, that too. How come we can't figure out affordable child care for parents? What's wrong? What is wrong with LGBT persons having equal treatment under the law? I think about it, and Jesus asked questions a lot. I think if we read the Gospels, the stories of Jesus, it seems almost as much as Jesus is saying something, he's almost equally as much asking questions to people. He's asking why are the people that are most in need of God's love being shunned? Why don't the poor get more help from the religious? Why do we have to set limits on God's love? Jesus was all about asking questions. So I think asking questions is a great place to start. And, life is complicated. But I think we do need to acknowledge that our actions have unintended consequences and that sometimes we fall short of where we want to be. But again, I don't think we can stay there, because I think if we're going to be true to what we believe, if we're really going to be like the tax collector, we've got to start doing differently, or at least I think thinking differently. And I think the rub, at least for me, as someone who wants to be true to what I say I believe, is it means it's going to cost me something. Time, energy, effort. Cooking at home, God forbid. But I think the opposite, pretending everything's fine, it's kind of absurd, if I can say that. Does really everything seem fine right now? And I know there's people like the Pharisee, right? There's people like the Pharisee in our world today who are like, God, I thank you that I'm not like that struggling family, like that single working mom, like that student trying to pay my bills. They say, I've earned every dollar I've worked for, and I've included in my will a portion for charity. God, I thank you that I'm not like that singling mom struggling to get by, the family trying to pay their medical bills, like the LGBT person, seeking equal treatment. I'm better than them. I mean, there's people like that. But I think the question for us today, the question is, what does Jesus ask of us? I think maybe that's the ultimate question that the parable leaves open. Is who do you want to be? Which person do you want to be? Because I'll tell you this much, I think one person that day came home from the temple transformed. And I bet you can guess which one it is. That's the person that I want to be. How about you?